Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Alena and in this video I'm going to show you how I made this beautiful apron dress. I used a pattern for it, so I'll leave the link in the description box. Are you ready? Let's go! First of all, we make a mock-up. I'm not a huge fan of this step, as you know, we all like to sew using fancy fabric, not an old tablecloth or bed sheets. But I highly recommend not to skip this step, as it is very useful for making adjustments on it first, not to spoil your beautiful project fabric. Here I show you how to change the initial pattern of a pocket, as later I would use an overlock to hem the edges. And it's easier to do so when the edges are gentler, not steep. Also, after the first fitting of my mock-up, I understood that the bodice was too wide for me, so I decided to take 2.5 cm in each side seam. It's 5 cm in total. I didn't cut the back piece, only the two front bodice parts. If you'd also like to take in some centimeters, don't forget to add seam allowances and to move the buttonhole markings. It is very important to note that when we cut our bodice edges, their total height increases compared to that of the back part, so we should also add some extra material to the back height. That's why the mock-up is so important. First of all, I cut the edges, then measure the new heights of the front bodice parts, sum them up, concluding the seam allowances, and then compare the sum with the back height and add the missing centimeters to it. And off you go! When I'm done with the mock-up adjustments, I wash the fabric, dry it and press it. It's a long process, but it makes the cutting and sewing much easier and accurate. And don't forget to play with your fluffy friends. My cats sometimes come and watch me pressing the fabric. Then comes the cutting time. I'm not very fond of this process, as it takes me a lot of time and effort, especially when I try to align the fabric pattern. Here I cut 2 ruffles for the border of the dress. Then come 2 skirt pieces. I didn't film the cutting of the second piece, but believe me, I also cut it. Note that the back piece is slightly higher at the waistline. We should cut off 4 front side bodice parts, 2 for the lining and 2 for the front part. Then 4 pocket parts, 2 bodice ruffle parts. Then 2 straps. Oh, isn't it so satisfying to watch it in an accelerated mode? And then the time has come for the back parts. The back element in this dress is an interesting gather with a lot of elastics inside. And for me it was pure magic, but when I made a mock-up, I understood that the back piece had shrinked somehow in its height. So when cutting the piece from my fancy fabric, I added 2.5 cm just in case, with an intention to cut it off if everything goes okay. But what was my surprise when after making the gather, the back piece became exactly the height that I needed. So I warn you, please keep that in mind. Maybe you'll also need these extra centimeters. Also, don't forget to add extra height that we counted earlier to compensate the increased front bodice parts edges. And then we cut 2 front bodice pieces and that's it. Don't forget to put all the marks to the pieces. You'll need them later. Oh yes, I ignored the additional thin back straps, as I didn't need them. Thank you again, mock-up, for this. For this dress, we'd also need some fusible interfacing. We scissor out 2 straps, 2 front side bodice parts, and one front central bodice part. Then we fuse the pieces of interfacing to the front parts of the dress, not the lining parts. For the lining parts, I had another plan. I wanted to strengthen the bodice parts that would experience much stress during the everyday wear of the dress. So I've used the interfacing bias tape to the curved edges of the central and front side bodice pieces of the lining layer. And then I also fused the interfacing lengthwise thread tape to the same bodice pieces, but only to those parts that were straight. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, please watch the video, I show the whole process quite accurately there. Be careful, the fabric is very hot. When making pockets, I also strengthened the pocket openings with a fusible interfacing tape. Then I remembered that I wanted to shorten the straps for my size, so I did that. And let's go sewing! I always check what type of needle there is in my sewing machine before starting a new project. This time I used a number 70 needle for light fabrics. Okay, at first we should stitch the side bodice parts upper edges of the right and wrong sides together. I did it with 1 cm seam allowance. Then I trimmed the seam allowance of the wrong side a little bit. This is called a stairs method, in Russia at least. It reduces the bulk. Then I pressed the seams flat and ironed the seam allowances out to the wrong side. Always press your seams. This easy step makes the final piece look a lot better. As you can see, for pressing the curved seams I use 2 homemade pads. They are very easy to make and are very helpful. I made mine of cotton fabric and sawdust. After pressing, I top stitch the seam allowance by 1 mm from the edge to the wrong side. And then I cut the seam allowance by several millimeters in the curved places. This would help us turning the whole thing out and the fabric won't wrinkle. And guess what is our next step? Yes, pressing! At this point we should be very careful if we want a neat dress. You may want to hand stitch 2 parts together first, it's okay. What we want here is to make a very accurate edge. Okay, let's continue. Here I make gathers using the marks that we transferred from the pattern to our fabric earlier. I stitched with the longest stitch stroke 4 mm on my machine and with a seam allowance of 7 mm, so this seam won't be seen later. And then I pull the upper thread and make a gather. We are doing this only to our front parts. For our lining parts, we'll make the folds later. And now it's time for the lovely bodice ruffles. First of all, we have to hem the outer edges. For that, I would sew a baby hem. In Russia it is called a Moscow seam. We roll the edge to the wrong side of the fabric a little bit, just 4 or 5 mm, and stitch 1 mm in from the bottom of the folded edge using a small stitch stroke. Using short stitches here makes our hem very neat. Then use small sharp scissors and trim excess fabric as close to the stitching line as you can. This is a very time and patience-consuming process, but it is worth doing. When done with cutting, roll the edge to the wrong side of the fabric one more time, creating a tiny fold, and stitch down the center of the fold. Thus we have 2 lines of stitching on the inside and 1 line on the outside. Don't forget to press that down. Then repeat the whole process for the second ruffle. Then I rolled one of the edges of each strap in to the wrong side of the fabric by 1 cm and pressed them down. I also folded the back piece of our dress in half, the wrong sides inside. After that, I measured the strap from its one edge to the ruffle end marking and made a gather on my ruffle, so its length fitted the strap perfectly. It is very important on this stage to distribute the fabric evenly. Here I made a gather by stitching 2 parallel lines, the first one 7 mm and the second 15 mm off the edge. After connecting the ruffle and the strap, I would remove the outer stitch. Then we connect our ruffle and not rolled side of the strap with their right sides inside. Before stitching them together, We should also add the front side bodice part to this fabric pie. The markings on the strap pattern would guide you. We put the right side of the bodice piece to the wrong side of the ruffle, as I show in the video. Then stitch all 3 pieces together with their right side inside, with 1 cm seam allowance. Then I carefully check the seam to make sure everything is okay and remove the visible stitches that were made to form the gather. After that, I draw a 1 cm line off the edge of the remaining strap tail, so it would be easier to press it down later. Then I press the just made seam, tucking the seam allowance under the strap. But be careful, we don't want to ruin our beautiful ruffle, so don't touch it with the iron. After that, I fold the strap in half. As you have already noticed, after pressing the seams or folds with an iron, I use the special pad to dry them and make more flat. This helps a lot when the fabric is tricky and difficult to work with. My next step is making our strap's tail's corners neat. We put the strap ends right sides facing each other and stitch. Then trim seam allowance by half, turn the thin out and set the corner right. For this I usually use a bodkin. When I'm happy with how the corners look, I pin the 2 layers together and top stitch on the front side by 1 mm from the strap's edge, where it connects with the ruffle. And that's it! Don't forget to press the thin down. And again, be very careful not to touch the ruffle with the iron, only the stitches. This is it for now. We'll continue sewing this beautiful apron dress in the next video. This is my first video ever, so if you liked sewing with me, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. I will be very glad if you leave a comment, and thank you very much for watching. Bye!